Okay, awesome. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Today, we are here at the Career Journeys webinar. We're really excited today to learn from some Western New York professionals who work in a variety of science fields about their career journeys. This webinar is a part of a series of webinars called Preparing for a Career in Science that is specifically for high school students. So you may have joined us on one of our past webinars. Just last week, we talked about how to build a first resume. We shared some tips and tricks. Today, we're obviously going to be talking to these panelists who I'm really excited to hear from about their career journeys. And next week, we're actually going to be learning from some representatives from the National Wildlife Federation about some of the career planning tools that they have available for students. So I'd encourage you to check out the other events that we have in this series and keep your eye open for more opportunities that we'll have available to come this spring and summer. So to start, I'll introduce myself. My name is Claudia Rosen. I'm a Senior Community Engagement Coordinator at Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper. Also on the call today is Sarah Koslow. She is an Ecological Programs Manager at Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper. She's going to be helping out with some of our housekeeping stuff. She's recording this webinar. So if you would like to watch this webinar again, or maybe you have a friend who missed it and couldn't make it, you can share the link with them at the end. If you haven't heard of Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, we are a nonprofit organization that's based in Buffalo, New York. And our mission is to protect and restore water and surrounding ecosystems for the benefit of current and future generations. So we do this in a couple different ways. We protect clean water, we restore the health of ecosystems, we connect people to their water, and then we also try to inspire economic growth and community engagement. So I just wanted to do a few housekeeping notes. I already mentioned that we are going to be recording this webinar. I also want to mention that you do have the option to participate in this webinar by using the question and answer function. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little chat box that says question and answer. So you can ask questions of our amazing speakers that we're about to hear from while they're speaking, or at the end. We're also going to have a few minutes for questions. So that wraps up our housekeeping. And before we dive in, I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on where we are. So I mentioned that Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper focuses its work in the Niagara River watershed. This map shows that watershed in the yellow area. It also shows with those stars the city of Buffalo, the city of Niagara Falls, and where I'm calling in from, which is in Derby, right on 18 Mile Creek at the edge of our watershed. So I hope that maybe you can imagine placing the star that says you wherever you're calling in from today, and think about where you're located within our watershed. We are located in a really special place. We're right in between two Great Lakes, Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. And we know that over 40 million people get their drinking water from the Great Lakes. So I think it's really exciting that we had some folks call in today. Maybe you want to learn about a career in science, and someday you might work towards protecting that amazing natural resource that we have through your job, through your career. So thank you for joining us today. And I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are recording this webinar from the original territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. So this means people of the Longhouse. The Haudenosaunee settled and thrived in this area in the Niagara River watershed long before European settlers, and we acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land and our water. So if you are interested, take a look at this map. Maybe you recognize some of these names, some of these nations and their current territories. If you live somewhere else, or maybe you've traveled, you can check the link down below to check out other Native peoples and their current and historic territories. So with that, I'm so excited to introduce our very first speaker, Michael Cuzia Carmel, who is a geologist with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Michael is a native of Albany, where he has strong ties to the urban community and works as a geologist with the DEC Division of Water. So Thank you for joining us today, and we'd love to hear a little bit about you and your career journey.
Thanks, Claudia. I hope everyone can hear me well. As you can see there, that picture captures me at the Swinburne skating rink in Albany, New York. And I guess before I really get started with my career journey, I should say that as a bit of a swerve, I do work currently out of the DEC central office in Albany. So although not technically based in Western New York, I have done a lot of my recent work with DEC in Western New York, and specifically in the Buffalo and Niagara River area. So again, a little bit about me. Born and raised in Albany, went to public school, Albany High School, and around the time I was in 11th grade, getting sort of towards that that stage of my I guess education, where I was beginning to consider going to college and sort of those big decisions that some of you may be facing now. I was able to enroll in a program that Albany High offered called it was a college in the high school program, and I'm not sure if some of you have similar programs in your respective schools, but it was essentially a combined internship and coursework program. And I chose to go into an engineering focused, I guess it was called an exploration technically. And through that, I was able to get some valuable intern work with the New York State Department of Transportation, who, like the DEC, has their main headquarters in Albany, New York, and that essentially rounded out my my senior year of high school at Albany High. And then, following graduating from high school, I enrolled at SUNY Binghamton, and that's where I studied environmental geology for 4 years, and that's where I first sort of, for one, I guess, decided that I wanted to be a geologist and pursued that field. And also at the same time, the Binghamton Geology Department was rather small, and they would have some returning alumni come through and provide sort of overviews and mentorship roles to the students who were enrolled in the program there. And that's where I began to get an idea of what the environmental consulting and the environmental remediation field sort of entailed. So I'm dating myself here, but I graduated from Binghamton in 2009. And upon graduating from college, I worked a number of odd jobs. I was a short order cook. I was a delivery boy. I was a lifeguard. I did a lot of the same stuff that I did, throughout my teens. And, I guess some of that was by circumstance. It was a tough sort of job market at that time. But, throughout that time when I was, doing that, I was, working on my resume. I had a lot of people who, helped me out, helped me develop my first resume and sort of, try to get my foot in the door. And, that took me some time. I didn't get, I guess, what you would call my first break until 2011. And that's when I started working for the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I worked for FEMA for about a year, and that was in response to the Tropical Storm Irene and Tropical Storm Lee disasters that occurred back in late 2011. So I don't know if you remember those, but there was a lot of significant flooding throughout New York State. And as a result of that, essentially what FEMA does is they rapidly build up and they hire a lot of people with technical backgrounds in geology and engineering. And they, I guess, broadly speaking, they assess damage to public infrastructure as in addition to individuals, homeowners, and then we develop scopes of work to ultimately repair, replace, and try to mitigate future damages to those those facilities. And I was placed on a team with a number of senior engineers and geologists, people who had, had entire careers to that point, in the respective fields. So it was a really good learning experience for me personally, because, here I was, some young kid just getting his foot in the door, and I was, I had an opportunity to sort of interact and be sort of mentored by a number of, experienced professional engineers and geologists. So from FEMA, ultimately the terms of that employment were, and this was something they actually told me when I was being interviewed for that job, was that the goal is to work yourself out of a job. So eventually I was laid off, from FEMA. We sort of, all the projects we had there were either completed or in a stage to where their permanent full-time employees could sort of take the reins. And I went back, on the job market. And shortly after that, I was able to land a job with a full service environmental consulting firm, URS Corporation, in upstate New York. And I worked as a field geologist for URS for about 4.5 years. And that's where I got a lot of good practical field experience there. If you like being outdoors, if you like, playing in the dirt, I would say, working for a full service environmental consulting company is the best way to get a lot of that really good practical hands-on experience. Just to, I guess, go through, and this is something that, I'd sort of been made aware of in college, but I guess I didn't appreciate it until I really, got going as a professional. But there's, some aspects to, I guess, environmental consulting in general that, I guess I wasn't aware of the, I guess, the scope of some of these, some of the aspects of consulting. For example, I did a lot of work on commercial construction projects as sort of an asbestos abatement project monitor, which can be a rather unglamorous and sort of a tough job at times. And that's something where, it took a lot for me to, I guess, appreciate the importance of developing, the skills of, associated with those tasks, those projects, as opposed to what I thought at the time was, more my cup of tea, my bread and butter, which was, contaminated site assessment, groundwater investigation, modeling. And certainly I did get to do a lot of that too. But I would say when you work for a company that's that big and has such a broad portfolio, you get to kind of experience everything. And, I guess with the benefit of hindsight now, looking back on things, I did learn a lot of valuable sort of transferable skills, if you will. I'd say one of the most important things that you're going to constantly be learning about and sort of developing as you become and, grow as a professional is the ability to interact with people. And, you never know what contexts and, what type of people you're going to encounter and, have to interact with as a professional. And, sort of being able to, develop an aptitude for that, across sort of a number of situations is important. So ultimately, after I, I should say, while I was working for URS, which at the time was ultimately bought out by another company, I was pursuing employment with the state of New York, and they are changing the rules as far as how you go about doing it. But at the time, I had taken a civil service exam, specifically for engineering geologists, and I based on my score on that, I was placed on a list. I think I was there weren't a lot of people on the list, but I was sort of middle of the pack, admittedly. And, you know, I was on the list for a few years, and then eventually I was contacted by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and ended up going in for an interview. And I ended up getting a job there with the Great Lakes program. And that's how I came to, work with Claudia and the folks at Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper. And my role at DEC was admittedly much different from what I was doing with URS Corporation. I wasn't in the field nearly as much, but I was essentially, managing this program, the Area of Concern program, which is a federally funded sort of environmental conservation and cleanup program, based on the entire Great Lakes Basin. And what it stems from is the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, just a document from the 70s that identified these areas of sort of specific or extreme ecological degradation. As you can imagine, sort of the Buffalo River and the Outer Harbor, the Lower Genesee River, most of the Niagara River were designated as AOCs, if you will. And what the United States and Canadian governments did in order to sort of assess these AOCs against each other and against, unimpacted areas was to identify a series of these beneficial use impairments. And these BUIs are sort of, discrete indicators of, degraded ecological quality. The chief example is, the restrictions on fish and wildlife consumption. So ultimately, my responsibility at DEC up until recently, when I switched jobs internally there, was to manage the AOC program on behalf of the Region 9 office and the main office in Albany. And so I got to spend a lot of time going out to Buffalo and meeting the folks at Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, and the other local stakeholder groups who are involved in managing the cleanup of these AOCs. So really the job itself involved, a lot more of these, I had to lean pretty heavily on a lot of these, interpersonal, communication skills that, perhaps I developed in different contexts. But I found that, again, one of the key things and one of the through lines throughout at least my career so far is that, the ability to, understand people, to communicate effectively with people is always going to be a valuable skill, regardless of, what career path you choose. And I've just found that, trying to be open, receptive, listen to where people are coming from, specifically what they're, trying to accomplish has been sort of a good basic toolkit for me. And regardless of whether, I've been working on a commercial construction site, a remedial site, or in the context of, this sort of broader, recovery program. So I guess real quick, I'll wrap things up now. One thing I will say is I am currently working towards becoming certified as a professional geologist in New York State. Unfortunately for me, I kind of got caught in this liminal space between, being able to be grandfathered in as a licensed geologist based on my experience alone, and having to take these fundamentals of geology, practice of geology exams. And this is something, if you do pursue a career in science, specifically engineering or geology, make the recommendation now that these are exams that you're going to want to take. And I would say at least the fundamentals exam you're going to want to take, coming right out of undergrad, or, right when everything's fresh, because admittedly, when it's been 10 plus years, it's tough to refresh, to brush up on things. So I I guess that's my story. I guess thanks for giving me your time. And
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. That was some really great advice that you shared. I loved hearing about how communication was kind of a through line throughout all of your different experiences, even though they were so diverse. To move us along, I am going to bring it up to our next speaker, which I'm really excited to also introduce Rachel Roberson, who is a program coordinator. She works in the field of public health, and she works for the Western New York Children's Environmental Health Center. So thank you for joining us, Rachel, and we're excited to hear your story. We just heard from Michael, so I know you have a very different job, and we'd love to hear how you got there today.
Thank you, Claudia. Just thank you everyone for your time. It's so nice to be here and just to chat with you all. So I'm Rachel. I'm the program coordinator of the Children's Environmental Health Center. We're located at Niagara Pediatrics on Niagara Street. So my story is kind of young. I graduated just this past May with my master's in public health, and then the year before that with my bachelor's in health promotion. I graduated from Damon College. So public health is the science of prevention. I never really considered myself to be a sciencey person until I found public health. So public health is vast. There's so much possibility within this field. There's epidemiology, which is the study of disease. There's biostatistics, which if you like math would be for you, not really for me. There's environmental sciences, emergency and disaster preparedness, like Michael kind of talked to when he mentioned FEMA. Then there's community education, outreach, organizing, policy, advocacy. I mean, the list goes on. And public health is really everywhere you look. You know, it's seatbelts, it's smoke-free parks in schools, it's vaccines. So throughout my time in college, I developed a lot of interests within public health and environmental health topics. For example, the social determinants of health. It's the idea that where we work, play, live, and learn influence our health and well-being, and a lot of the times is out of our control or rooted in systems that, you know, are tough to change. And then another part of public health that really resonated with me was just this idea of the upstream approach to health. So a lot of what you see in healthcare today is downstream, right? Like we're treating the disease once it's there. But public health really aims to prevent disease and address the root causes that cause sickness and poor quality of life. Another part of public health that really resonates with me is just the racial inequities in access to adequate health care, different services, grocery stores, parks. And so these are all the things that kind of fire me up and sort of helped me find my current job. So I never really had a dream job, right? Like, how can you in public health? It's like, where do I even begin? So I did a lot of research and internships within maternal and child health. I worked with organizations like Buffalo Prenatal Perinatal. I did a lot of work with People Inc., which works with folks with disabilities. And so it allowed me to explore a lot of different, you know, possibilities within public health. So when I was looking for a job, I sort of tried to find different organizations that shared a similar interest or mission that I had. And that's how I found my current role. So like I said, my career journey is fairly short and young. I started my position last August. And so I really love the field of environmental health. A lot of my work, I mean, it's all over the place. We have our hands in many places, and I plan and coordinate different projects and activities. Like just today, I was in the clinic at Niagara Street handing out different activities to the kiddos for Earth Day. And we do a lot of other work for environmental health and justice. I participate in local community outreach and education. I'm on a number of coalitions that deal with, you know, a number of different problems within Buffalo. We have a lot of concerns about lead in the homes and just, you know, supporting families with that and helping them best respond to issues like that in their home. So yeah, but, you know, kind of like Michael said, like networking is everything, like finding the folks that are willing to mentor you and support you in your career. Not everybody is new in this field, so there are really, experts that you can lean on and just look to for direction. So I think I'm at my time there, so I'll pass it back to Claudia. But thank you all for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you, Rachel. I think it is so cool to hear from you. We work with a lot of high school students in Niagara Falls and Buffalo, and a lot of them are really interested in the health sciences, but they may not have heard about this career path in public health. So it's really inspiring to have you here and get to share your story a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to pass it on to Jillian, our next speaker. And then at the end, if the folks on our webinar are okay with staying for a few extra minutes, we do have a couple questions and we'll answer those after Jillian has a chance to speak. So I'm really excited to introduce Jillian Griffin. She is a pollution prevention engineer at the New York State Pollution Prevention Institute at RIT, where she provides technical assistance to businesses interested in becoming more sustainable through sustainable supply chain management, waste reduction and diversion, and pollution prevention, which is a lot. You do a lot of great work, Jillian. So thank you so much for joining us. And we're excited to hear a little bit about your career journey.
Thanks, Claudia. I am excited and happy to be here and have the opportunity to share a little bit of my path, which has been sort of long and winding. And I like talking about it because when I think back to when I was in high school, I remember trying to think about, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go? Like what's going to be really fulfilling for me? And that was always a really big open question for me. And I have finally gotten to the end of that. So I guess I'll tell you a little bit about that. So in terms of my education, I started out in the social sciences. I studied sociology in undergrad. So that's as people in fields like geology and biology and chemistry may like to call a soft science. But it gave me a really great opportunity to understand some of the things related to environmental justice, some of the things that Rachel was talking about in terms of social determinants of health, certainly, but other outcomes. And when I finished that, I still wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So I worked for a while. I actually worked in higher education at the University of Minnesota in finance and operations, helping at a foundation raise money. I did that for about 8 years. And I then moved to the city of Chicago, still trying to sort of figure it out, getting into, different skills and trying to understand what I was good at really. And worked at a university there. But then I decided to keep asking some questions that I had been exploring sort of internally. And I took what felt like a leap of faith and applied to business school in Chicago. And when I was there, I got to learn about sustainable management. So I have had sort of a long time appreciation for nature and for animals. And I think I was in like a Save the Whales club in the first grade or something like that. And so all of a sudden, things started kind of converge for me. So the sort of social aspects that I cared about in terms of like equity and equality and why there are differences in the world between different people and demographics. And then going into like, well, how do you impact that? And I would always think, you need money talks, you need money to make impact. So that sort of led me into business. And I kind of felt like, well, I'm not sure if I can reach the populations or the topics that I'm interested in through business. It's very corporate and very kind of cutthroat feeling sometimes. But then when I was in business school, I started to learn about things like social enterprise and ways to use business to leverage business to improve outcomes for different demographics and different areas. So it could be about public health, or it could be about the environment, et cetera. And then finally, I found my way to the Rochester Institute of Technology, where I studied sustainable systems. And that was sort of like the third and final leg of my educational pursuits. You might have heard of something called the triple bottom line, which is all about measuring success through three different things, right? Social, environmental, and economic. So I studied sociology, I went to business school, and then I ended up with some environmental skills and competence from RIT. And that really is what launched me into where I am now. And I don't know how I got to be so lucky, but it's like the perfect combinations of things for me to do. So I get to do things that impact people positively. I get to do things that promote and preserve the environment, and I get to help businesses do that to reinforce that throughout our broader community. And when you're navigating your way, trying to figure out what it is you might want to do, I spent a lot of time figuring out what I didn't want to do. And I felt like I was never going to stop doing that. It's like, I know what I don't want, but what do I want? And I think what was useful for me is just curiosity. So it sounds simple, but to ask questions, explore things, don't be intimidated. I was a very like humanities, social science oriented student, and science can feel really big and overwhelming. But if you break it down, it's just about discovering and understanding new things. It's about improving our knowledge and understanding of the world around us using observation and experimentation. So ask a question, try and find an answer, and you can be doing science, right? And another thing, I found a lot of inspiration just learning about other people and their pursuits, right? So I was telling Claudia earlier today about this really great book that was influential for me, that I highly recommend. It's called, I don't know if you can see this, it's called Eco Amazons. And I actually read this through like a women's leadership program many, many years ago. But it's awesome. It's these 20 women who pursued environmental goals just because they were personally motivated and passionate about it. So I'll just give you a couple examples. One of them was she refers to herself as a housewife activist, her words, who actually got involved in the Love Canal situation in the Buffalo, Niagara area. Another person was working to stop uranium mining on Navajo lands. The woman who made the film The Story of Stuff is in that book. Another woman developed an organic gardening program that got launched at San Quentin Prison in California. There are people who work on eco-fashion. It's like, the one thing I can say aside from ask questions and don't be afraid to ask for help is anything that you might have an interest in, you could circle it back to science and find a way to contribute to improving the environment and your community around you. And while doing all of that, you can create economic growth. It's really a unique position I found myself in. And if you're feeling discouraged at any point in time, just keep going. Like, you'll find your way. I didn't think I would, and I did. So if I can, you can definitely do it. I have lots of other anecdotes and things that I could share. I know that we're running short of time, so I'm more than happy to connect with anyone now or in the future who might have questions. There are lots of ways to get involved locally. I'll just throw out a couple things. I'm in Rochester, so there's a Rochester Youth Climate Leaders organization. The New York Youth Climate Leaders is a nation statewide organization that students can get involved in. And there are all kinds of organizations like Buffalo Niagara Waterkeepers that I'm sure would love for you to volunteer and get your hands in there and learn some things. So I'm with that and just say I really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope that you learned a little something.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Jillian. That was really inspiring advice. I'm going to take it to heart myself for sure. And I hope the students on this call are also going to take it to heart. I love that you mentioned that no matter what you're interested in, you can circle it back to the environment and to improving your community. And I think that's so true. I always think about these big environmental problems that we're facing. And the fact is, we're going to need all different types of people, whether they're business people or geologists or people who in public health, to tackle those big problems. So thank you for sharing that. I thought that was really inspiring. Because of the interest of time, I'm going to kind of close us out here at the end. Thank you everyone on this webinar for joining us, and a huge thank you especially to our amazing speakers who joined us today. We appreciate your time and for sharing a little bit about your career journeys. If anyone has questions, please feel free to reach out to me. You should have my email from registering, and you can also check out Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper at bnwaterkeeper.org. Send us an email, send us your questions. We'd love to have you get involved in our organization, and we'd love to have you volunteer with us. So, and also happy Earth Day. So thank you, everyone.